Hi guys, in today's lesson we're going to continue solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. We're just going to focus a little bit more on how to simplify some of the trickier ones. So here's our quadratic formula again. So let's say you did the quadratic formula and you worked it out and this is the answer you got. Now we're going to focus on how do you simplify that further. Well, first of all, the square root of 20 can be broken down. The square root of 20 is the same as the square root of 4 times 5. Then the square root of 4 is 2, so it comes out of the radical. So that's 2 root 5. That's the first part. So now if I put that back in with the answer, I have negative 6 plus or minus 2 root 5 all over 4. All right, now here's the next thing. If all three numbers that are involved, not the number underneath the radical though, don't look at the 5. If all of the three numbers, the one outside of the radical and the first number and the bottom number, if all of those numbers can be divided by the same thing, and only if all three of them can be divided by the same thing, then you simplify, divide them all by that number. So all of these can be divided by 2. So if I divide the 6 by 2, that's going to be turned into a negative 3. 2 divided by 2 is a 1, and I won't even write it. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So my final answer now would end up being x equals negative 3 plus or minus 1 root 5, but I don't put the 1, all over 2. Now you might wonder why we are allowed to do that. Well, at any time when you have a fraction, let's say I had a number like 6/8, I can divide the top and the bottom both by 2. So that's kind of what we're doing, but you're also sort of factoring out a 2 in the numerator first. But the shortcut is just try to remember all three numbers have to be divisible by the same thing. Here's another example. This one, compare the first problem that we just finished to the second one. After we had simplified the first problem, it was what? Negative 6, and then we had a plus or minus 2 root 5. Okay, yeah, that's what it was. All over 4, I think it was. Yeah, sorry, let me erase that. So because all three numbers, the 6, the 2, and the 4, could all be divided by 2, we went ahead and divided by 2 to simplify. This next example, though, if you look at that, we have a 6 and a 3 and a 4. This you cannot simplify. You cannot go underneath the radical. You cannot simplify under the radical unless you can take the square root of it. So when I'm talking about simplifying this last step, you should be looking at the three numbers, the first number, the number outside the radical, and the bottom. If there's anything that all of those numbers can be divided by, then you simplify further. So this second example, the one that I have in this red rectangle, that actually can't be simplified any further. You would just leave it like that. Okay, here's another one. This one, looking at the 9, the 3, ignore the 7, and the 6. Is there something that 9 and 3 and 6 can all be divided by? And hopefully you thought, yes, 3, divide them all by 3. So divide each number by 3. 9 divided by 3 will give me a 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and again, you won't have to write that. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. So now when I write my final answer for that, it would be x equals 3 plus or minus 1 root 7, but that's like saying 1 times 5. You wouldn't write the 1, all over 2. Okay, so last one, this one, there's two things kind of going on this one. Remember, first, if there's a negative in the denominator, we change all the signs. So you can do that first if you want to. You can go through and say, okay, I know this is going to be now, it's going to be a negative 8 and a positive 2. And changing a plus minus is just a minus plus, but we still write it plus minus. So that's the first thing. Now, in addition to that, the 8, the 4, and the 2 can all be divided by 2. So I'm going to divide them all by 2. So divide by the 8 by 2, and I'm going to get a negative 4. Divide the 4 by 2, and I get a 2. Divide the 2 by 2, and I get a 1. So now when I write my final answer, I have a negative 4 plus or minus 2 2 root 7 all over 1. And since it's dividing by 1, you won't even write that either. So that would not even be written, and you would just leave it like that. And that's your final answer. So now let's put it all together and do one problem from the top using the quadratic formula. So remember, you got to find your A, B, and your C first. You really don't have to write down what A, B, and C are, but I'll do that for you. A is the number in front of the squared term. B is the number in front of the linear term, or the first power. And C is the constant. Oops, -1. So now applying the quadratic formula, x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared will be 16 minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, which will be 4. Okay, bring down the -4 and the plus or minus, the square root of. This, put everything underneath the radical in your calculator at one time, or figure out you have 2 negatives, so that's going to be a plus. So this is now going to be 16 plus 8, which is 24, all over 4. Okay, so now we have to look at that radical and say, okay, can I simplify the square root of 24? In other words, are there 2 numbers that multiply to 24 where one of them is a perfect square? And I can. The square root of 24 is the same as the square root of 4 times 6. Okay, and the square root of 4 is 2. So that's going to come out of the radical, and it'll be 2 root 6. So now let me rewrite this answer. It's -4 plus or minus 2 root 6 all over 4. Okay, now look at all the outside numbers. Don't look at that 6. Ignore the 6 now. Looking at the -4, the 2, and the +4, all of those can be divided by 2, which will make this a -2, a +1, and a 2. So my final answer is -2 plus or minus 1 root 6, which is just root 6, all over 2. So just a tiny little piece that's extra today. Practice with that. Hopefully it goes well for you. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. And by the way, if you do have a question, you can just text me the question, or email me or message me the question, and I can even make a video of just what your question is and send it just to you. So don't be shy with your questions, guys. Good luck.